Hey everyone, welcome to Chris's Corner. Sarah's here today. If you don't know Sarah, she's one of our small group pastors. She is also my sister. She also leads prayer ministry at the church. And she's about to read the text.
I'm going to read the text for today. So it is Matthew 5, and we're starting in 33 and going to 37. And this is what it says. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Yeah, so Jerry, you talked about the idea of oaths and this idea of your yes being yes and your no being no, which is found here, but it's also found elsewhere in Scripture. It's a clear theme in Scripture.
Right.
And really just speaks to integrity even of communication and honesty. So yeah, could you explain to us a little bit like some of the background of this talk for you and what you find yourself studying?
Well, I learned quite a bit studying because I didn't grow up reading this verse being like, oaths.
The oaths.
And so let me try to briefly explain at least how I've come to understand it from reading some commentaries and talking to some different wise people who know the word well. Essentially, like there are commands in Scripture about when we make vows to God, and when we make vows in general, and so what had happened is the religious leaders took these scriptures and essentially created hierarchy around the vows that we make or the promises that we make or the words that we say. And so essentially it was like they would go, okay, if you say it in this way, like I swear to God, essentially, or like this oath in the name of the Lord, then the oath would be binding or have a certain level of power. But then everything else would have a different level of weight to it. So essentially they were making like categories of how do you say it?
Like how much you needed to actually keep your word, basically.
Yeah. And
which ones you had to actually do.
Yeah, and so you'll notice Jesus like going, it's like, whether it's, he mentions earth, he's like, well, it's the Lord's footstool. Heaven, it's where his throne is. Jerusalem, city of the great king. And his point is, you can't take God out of the equation. You can never take him out of the equation. So really simply, it's this invitation for us to think about everything we say is said in the presence of the living God, which is so powerful. Like there are things that we say in life, I think about a wedding or moments even like baptism, like we just celebrated, like that there's vows that we take, there's things that are really important that we say. But the general idea is but nothing we say isn't seen and heard by God himself, and that gives it importance. And in other words, you can't compartmentalize your life as a follower of Jesus. It's all in his presence. So I think that's kind of what Jesus is addressing, what he's coming against, this mindset of like, I can separate the importance of words. Yeah,
there's nothing that we could ever swear by or commit to by that's not his anyways.
Exactly.
We have no control over any of it, and he has control over all of it, and he's present for it all. I love that idea of like witnesses at a wedding, or when you're in those moments where you're like very aware of the presence of God. And I think it's such a helpful reminder and would do us so much good if we could somehow have that awareness in our day-to-day lives when we're even just making simple promises to people, simple statements, to be like, God is here and present. I think our words would carry a lot more weight if we could remind ourselves of that more often.
That's it's really well said. And I think that's what Jesus is getting at, really. I did talk about that. I mean, you know this, but I did talk about this picture of a wedding. And I think one of the things I wrestle with a little bit is like I mentioned earlier, obviously words said in a wedding are really important words, they're commitments. But I was saying how when I do a wedding, or when someone does a wedding, they always say we're gathered together in the presence of God and these witnesses.
Yeah.
And when I do a wedding, I try to like slow that line down and just go, hey, I want us to all stop and just think for a second. The big deal today is that we are gathered together to witness this, but actually God's here to witness it. And I think my conclusion after going through this text for a while is that is how we should think about everything in life. Like you were saying, like every promise we make, every commitment we make, everything that we say, I'm making that commitment. I'm saying that yes in God's presence. And so of course my yes should be yes. It should be no different than any other place in life because it's been said before him. So pretty lofty, but beautiful.
Yeah, so cool. You talk about like the way the Pharisees had kind of compartmentalized their vows and their oaths. And I think it's so interesting because Jesus so often calls out and calls on the Pharisees for the hypocrisy of the way they're living and the way they're speaking. And I think when I think about this passage, I just think of it as such a safeguard against hypocrisy. Like if we really, like if our yes was yes and our no was no, if we were really honest about the way we communicated, how much hypocrisy would be safeguarded against. And I don't know if you want to speak into that more, but just kind of as a practical thing of like this as a safeguard on our communication even. Yeah,
I just think it's a beautiful thing it's a beautiful thing how much truthfulness is valued in the kingdom. I actually didn't even talk very much about this, but I think the reason why we can be fully truthful in the kingdom is because even when truth makes us look dumb, we don't get our identity, or look really potentially shameful, but we don't get our identity though through how much people like us or really approve of us. We get it from Jesus. And so actually in the kingdom, our value's in him, so we can be truthful without fear that we're gonna lose significance, which is a really cool thought. And I think actually the safety we have in Jesus and the call we have in Jesus allows us to have integrity. Is like maybe a really positive way of thinking about it. Actually, it just invites us to live that life. And it's kind of like, it's almost like the king's going, everything, I see everything, and things are valuable as they're done before me, not as you look impressive to someone or whatever. And so in that sense, of course, just live the same, live consistent. It's the only thing that makes sense. So those are a couple thoughts on that.
That's really good. For small groups and for chatting together, I think it'd be really good just to, for one, talk about even just ways you guys could bring like that awareness of God's presence into your conversations, short of maybe like every time you go for coffee with someone, slowing down and saying we're gathered here together in the presence of God, and like that. I mean, maybe that would be a great thing to try. Someone's going to try it, but short of that, I think it'd be really helpful to just talk about ways of kind of increasing your awareness of the presence of God in your life. I think you talked about a Craig Groeschel quote that was really helpful. It talked about Christian atheists who believe in God but don't live like he's there, and how can we bring that awareness that he is there in our day-to-day. It'd be really helpful.
I love that. And then maybe one way to phrase the question could just be like, how can we often ask this in small group, how can we help one another live like God exists and sees everything? Like, how can we help one another be more aware of his presence, his approval, what that means, the weight that carries when we consider our words. And then really practically, at the end I said, like, this does get very practical in the sense of we should keep our vows. We should keep our word, and we should tell the truth and not lie. Yeah. Like, it really does manifest in that's kind of the part of the outcome of really living like God always sees and always cares. And I was just so struck by it. There's so much scripture about being truthful and honest and living with integrity in the Bible. And so one thing I think would be great as well is to talk about how can we create environments where we forgive people as they confess lies and things where they've been hiding, but also support one another in actually living lives where we tell the truth, where we keep our commitments, where we have better rhythms, and we value our word more than we do. And I think that's it's just an ongoing question for me. How do I grow in that area? And I obviously thought about that a lot this week, but I hope all of us can think about that a lot this week as we have conversation together. So
Awesome. Well, I'll throw it to you.